everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, and everybody else, my friends, down in the comments below. You might already know the conversation going on between Sony and Microsoft as to the acquisition of Activision Blizzard and all the continual ramifications that keep coming from that, whether they be legal, whether they just be reputational, etc. And there's been some recent developments, some kind of crazy things that are being said.
Both sides have been saying some, well, suspect things that we're going to jump into right now. They're not without making very good points on both sides.
Right.
But now we have kind of like been able to figure out exactly what Sony is arguing against Microsoft for when it comes to this deal going through, because the current investigation that's ongoing with UK regulators is ongoing. And they've just released a 22-page document that was Sony's response to the deal and why, in their opinion, that it shouldn't go through. And since then, Microsoft has responded again to this governing board about why it should go through. So we've got a lot of points and a lot of counterpoints to go through. Essentially, this 22-page document has been revealed and it has been reported on by VGC, who's done an excellent write-up, and I'm taking some quotes from there. But one of the main kind of talking points surrounding this is Sony's claim that if Microsoft gets the likes of Call of Duty, if they make those games exclusive to their platform, they will essentially push Sony out of the 18-rated shooter space specifically. And I've seen a lot of like jokey jokes on Twitter, kind of like calling this out as being ridiculous. But when you get into the actual like arguments made by Sony, I don't think they're completely off base. But it is interesting that they think that if they lose Call of Duty, they will suddenly become like Nintendo and have to make games for that, or at least cater their games to family-friendly audiences rather than engage in the likes of God of War or whatever.
That's the thing. I was going to say, it's not like Nintendo was struggling, but also Nintendo do have other age-rated games on there. And yes, they just launched God of War. And also this whole idea of if we can't secure one property, what does this mean? Oh my god, the sky is falling for the entire age bracket. Like, what the hell are you guys talking about?
Well,
but I'm Mr. Surface Level. You are very much Mr. Depth.
I'll tell you what they're talking about, Scott Telford. In this document, they said, quote, post-transaction, Xbox would become the one-stop shop for all the best-selling shooter franchises on console. Call of Duty, Halo, Gears of War, Doom, and Overwatch, as the decision explains, and it would then be free from serious competitive pressure. They go on to say, Microsoft claims that Nintendo's differentiated model demonstrates that PlayStation doesn't need Call of Duty to compete effectively, but this reveals Microsoft's true strategy. Microsoft wants PlayStation to become like Nintendo so that it would be a less close and effective competitor to Xbox. So on the surface here, I do get what they're saying, right? Microsoft is buying the best-selling first-person shooters on the market. They are getting Overwatch, they are getting Call of Duty, they are getting Doom, they are getting all of those games that they mentioned. And yes, are they just buying their way to the top of that space? I think they are. I think that's exactly what they're wanting to do. So when it comes to that point specifically, I do actually see Sony's point, because what competitors are left? They go on to mention Battlefield by name, and we'll get into that when we're talking specifically about Call of Duty versus the world, essentially. But in this case specifically, Microsoft does have the leg up, and yes, Sony could make competitors, but not in the short term.
Yeah, maybe not in the short term. However, I just think it points to a staggering lack of innovation or want to create something of their own volition. Like you said, maybe not in the short term, but a lot of those franchises, especially Call of Duty, you can argue its best years are behind it. I know Modern Warfare 2 is selling well, but still, it's not the original Modern Warfare 2. It's not that original sort of run across the 2010s, but that's not my overall point. My overall thing is that PlayStation just don't want to seem to invest in their own stuff. They just keep being, oh no, everyone's taking things away from me. And I'm not, advocating for big corporate buyouts, but I just don't know why their side of why don't we just make something isn't being represented more. And also, have they not played Titanfall? I mean, have we not seen Apex Legends blew up overnight?
This is the thing that I'm going to get into when it comes to Sony's response here, because on paper, this is literally printed on paper, I think they make a lot of good points, but like you said there, do ignore the realities of their own business. Like they're talking about not being able to compete in the first-person shooter space or even the third-person shooter space, ignoring the fact that they themselves are not investing in first-party shooter games anymore. We had the last first-person shooter in the AAA space that they made in-house was Killzone Shadowfall on the previous generation, right at the start of it. They
8 years ago
killed Killzone, they've killed Resistance, and it doesn't even seem like they have any kind of interest in producing those games in-house. However, their explanation for that would be that they have Call of Duty. They don't need to compete because they don't want to compete with Call of Duty anyway. And when that game is on their platform, and when the likes of Overwatch are also on their platform, they are just essentially reaping the rewards from that. Because in their own words, nobody can compete with Call of Duty. So when that game is multi-platform, they don't have to make those first-party games.
Even though Elden Ring outsold Call of Duty last year, so it's like for this year's Elden Ring sales outsold last year's Call of Duty, and I get that Modern Warfare 2 was solid, but again, I don't buy their entire thing. I also think it's quite a sad indictment on the state of their studios that they're saying that all the exclusive DLC, all the add-ons they can secure for Call of Duty, all the microtransaction money they can get from Overwatch is worth more than their own first-party shooter that they could just put the money into and develop. You could do a Resistance Trilogy Pack HD thing. At least that would put them something back on the market. I just feel like it's a lot of whining because they've not put the time in to make a first-person shooter again.
It's true, right? But I also do agree with them. Again, I'm not saying they're completely right, but I do agree with them in their assessment of Call of Duty as this behemoth that can't be touched. Many people have tried Sony themselves with the likes of, Resistance, with the likes of Killzone, and they've come nowhere near
they weren't
close to dethroning them. Like Sony singles out Battlefield in this statement, right? And they say that, quote, Call of Duty is too entrenched for any rival, no matter how well equipped to catch up. It has been the top-selling game for almost every year in the last decade, and in the first-person shooter genre, it is overwhelmingly the top-selling game. And then they say that despite the similarities between Call of Duty and Battlefield, the Battlefield franchise cannot keep up. As of August 2021, more than 400 million copies of Call of Duty has been sold, while Battlefield has sold just 88.7 million copies. So they're signaling out their Battlefield as the closest competitor and saying, look, there is this massive disparity. Even the closest competitor is like a blip on the radar, is like an ant compared to Call of Duty's behemoth success. And I know, like you said there, you can bring in the likes of Elden Ring. You can bring in other exceptions to say that, like look, these games can beat Call of Duty in certain cases. But what I would also argue is that Elden Ring is also a freak, right? Elden Ring, sold way better than anyone expected. Was this real pop culture moment. And I don't think Sony can kind of just manufacture that themselves. Otherwise, they would have an Elden Ring every year, if that makes sense, in the shooter space.
I think it's a weird thing. Their argument is entirely based on established things in the past, like that whole idea of look how many sales units we had for Call of Duty, look how many sales units we had for Battlefield, and then assuming that will be the case going forward. Until Battlefield 2042 was a raging tire fire, that felt like the game that was going to dethrone Call of Duty last year. That felt like 2042 had so much momentum behind it. Halo Infinite had momentum to a certain degree, nowhere near the same, but that whole idea of something else is finally coming back into the space, there was a lot of conversations around that, of something else getting in there instead of Call of Duty, and I just feel like I get that their argument can only really be based on statistics. However, as much as an anomaly Elden Ring is, you would like to believe that something like 2042 is as well, and there's still a hell of a Battlefield fandom there that all it takes is a couple of stumbles from Call of Duty and something else playing their cards right to overthrow it again. I get what they're going from, but I think that to me it points to a staggering lack of belief in your studios going forward.
I know what you mean.
It's only looking backwards.
I wouldn't agree just in terms if we're talking about, dethroning Call of Duty. Yes, you can do well in this space. Like Sony has mentioned here, Battlefield as a franchise has sold 88 million copies. That is nothing to sniff at. No. But if you're trying to create a proper competitor, someone who can, like you say, they're dethrone Call of Duty if they stumble, I just don't think anyone can right now. Call of Duty has stumbled. In my opinion, Vanguard was a stumble. Black Ops Cold War was a stumble. And yet the other shooter games didn't outpace it. It still
if 2042 had landed, I guess that would be the thing.
But then we get into what ifs. Like, would it have? It might have, but would that just be a one-year blip? Would then it come back this year with Modern Warfare 2 and still broken sales records like Modern Warfare 2 has? Like, I think there are individual situations where you can point to an Elden Ring beating a Vanguard. However, Call of Duty as an entity, as a yearly thing, will always bounce back on top, at least in the current form that it is right now. And I think that's kind of the point they're making. I'm not saying that's a reason why the deal shouldn't go ahead, but I do see their point of view. When it comes to that, we're going to get into some other ridiculous things in a minute. But do you have anything else to add to the Call of Duty thing?
I think they're all fascinating. I just think that it reminds me of corporate think 101, which is just established thing is more valuable than new thing, which I just think is a fundamental maxim of humanity, that we need new stuff, which is something that I've argued for in various ranty videos and podcasts and everything else. And I would like to believe that someone as big as Sony can invest in the future as much as just relying on the past for years and years and years and just assuming that's still going to be okay. Just make something new.
Well, I'll tell you what Microsoft says in response to all of this Call of Duty stuff. They say that Call of Duty isn't actually special and it's not that unique. They point out that Call of Duty is consistently outranked in user polls on PlayStation about PlayStation players' favorite games. They say it's constantly outranked in Metacritic scores and constantly outranked in critical reviews. So they're saying essentially the franchise that they're buying isn't actually worth all that much.
No one even cares, man.
No one really cares about it. But obviously what they're omitting there is the sales numbers, because it doesn't matter if Call of Duty isn't everyone's favorite game. The stranglehold it has over the casual market, like I was referring to previously, is massive, and I don't even think Sony is talking necessarily about the critical response or the quality of the games. It's literally just how much they sell. Yeah,
brand association, word of mouth, household name.
Hilariously as well, Microsoft also say that Sony doesn't need Call of Duty because, in their own words, Sony's first-party games are of better quality than Microsoft. So even if they take Call of Duty, this is their argument, Sony still has all of these high-quality first-party games like God of War, which will sell, 20+ million copies, that allows them to be successful. So at this point, they're essentially saying, yeah, you might not have a Call of Duty competitor, but is that going to harm you much? Because you're not really competing in that space anyway, and you're still doing really well when it comes to your first-party titles.
Yeah, which is the side of it that, like, I hate agreeing with corporate stuff, but it's like that whole thing of, like, you guys have more to you, and the fact that your entire business, some large part of your business model is relying on the exclusives that you can shave off every year for Call of Duty. I get that that's a meaningful part of their bottom line, but divorced from this, I do think that it is, like I said, a sad indictment on the state of their studios, that they are relying so much on what can they claw back. That conversation around Call of Duty exclusivity, the different parts of it that are exclusive, whether it's modes or skins or whatever it is on PlayStation, is already souring quite a lot. I mean, even this year, Modern Warfare 2 stuff was just this sort of really boring basic infograph to just get it out there. It's just, okay, we're going to tell people what you can get, and we're not going to talk about it too much, because I feel like even PlayStation are aware that they have tried to corner the market on that stuff and just bought various things for their version of the game that a lot of people are just sick of seeing. So it's a weird thing, because another part of this is the idea of a 10-year exclusivity window, which was apparently pitched to Sony, which is one of the things that Jim Ryan said they just, it's untenable or whatever. But it's that whole thing of, given another 10 years, is Call of Duty still going to be this thing? Yeah, right. That's a whole other thing.
That's the question, because I think if we were here 10 years ago and we were saying, will Call of Duty be on top, many of us might have said no. And if I was asked right now, like you just did, will Call of Duty be on top in another 10 years, I'd maybe say no. But I mean, Call of Duty has constantly beat everyone's expectations, and in 10 years' time, and obviously this is a long-term plan by Microsoft, it very much could still be on top. That's true. 10 Call of Duties to come. We've just had Modern Warfare 2 being the most successful or fastest selling in the franchise. Like, I think there's still momentum in it yet, and it's a big if, isn't it? Like, will it be around in 10 years? Will it still be a problem for Sony if it does go exclusive to Microsoft, or will that 10-year deal help placate them? I'm not entirely sure.
I just, as an overall, I can't help but apply human psychology to it and wider entertainment trends, and just you would hope that, like, someone working for a Sony first party is pitching something that is like, this is our window into the first-person shooter space on PlayStation, backed with the amount of money, the budget, the likes of God of War, Horizon have, and then take that through and dominate the market, or be a meaningful player in the market. The entire genre isn't dependent on Call of Duty, even though I get that they have to lean on those things to make the argument to not let them have meaningful sales, which is what all of this stuff is just circling around. Basically, 100%. They just don't want the deal to go through, so both companies are stretching so much to try and make that happen or not happen.
I do love, like, the headlines that come out of this, because, like, the arguments get reductive to a point where Sony's saying Call of Duty is everything in the video game industry, and Microsoft saying it's not even that good. Like, we want to spend $84 billion on it, but to be honest, is it great?
We're all playing God of War, to be honest. I don't even need it.
Who can say?
Who cares?
In the MP First write-up, which essentially wrote up all of the executive summaries of the points that Sony sent to the CMA, they did have one interesting argument, I thought, about how the sale of Activision would impact consumers. And the thing about this is, it's a big quote, but I promise it's worth it. I do think Sony's making a lot of points here that are really valid, but the interesting thing is, I think they're being quite hypocritical as well, so we'll get into this now. They said about how the deal will affect consumers. They say that in the short short term, PlayStation users would no longer have access to Call of Duty or would be forced to spend £450 on an equivalent Xbox to play this hugely popular game on their less preferred device. In the midterm, a significant number of PlayStation users would likely switch to Xbox and/or Game Pass. Faced with weaker competition, Microsoft would then be able to increase console and game prices for Xbox users, including those that had switched from PlayStation, increase the price of Game Pass, and reduce innovation and quality. These harms would be amplified by the direct and indirect network effects at play in the industry, allowing Microsoft to further raise prices or reduce quality once its position has become even more entrenched. And that's the end of the quote. Now, the thing about this is, I think they're right. This is what monopolies do.
Okay.
This is what monopolies do. They make it so that the person with all the cards can do whatever they want. They don't care about innovation. They don't care about creativity because they all hold all the cards and they can charge customers whatever they want. They can raise prices on Game Pass and use the fact that they have Call of Duty to justify that. All of that I think is valid. The issue with that is that this is exactly what Sony has been doing with their market dominance. They cite here that Microsoft will be able to raise the prices of game consoles. What has Sony just done this year? Raise the price of the PlayStation 5. They talk about how the market dominance will allow Microsoft to raise video game copy prices.
Yeah, individual unit costs.
What has Sony done this year? They have raised their individual unit costs to $70 and £70 across the board. And why are they able to do that, Scott Tilford? Because they dominate the market right now, and therefore know that they will be able to get away with it. So what I look at here is a very valid point, but I just don't see how Sony can't be like, hang on, we're already doing that.
The thing is, that's one side of it. The other thing for me is that the entire argument falls down on the fact that they are still offering them a 10-year window for Call of Duty without exclusivity, if that even comes to that. Obviously, Phil Spencer's ruled out the idea of having a Game Pass app or whatever on PlayStation. However, Xbox are investing in an Xbox streaming app overall. But yeah, they have a 10-year window to build anything. Like, they have 10 years to come up with something else and put all the budget behind it. We got the original God of War in 5 years. The 2018 God of War. I meant original as the first of the two.
Yes.
Ragnarok just came out. That game went from a sketch on a napkin to being the 2018 God of War in 5 years. You have twice that time to come up with anything to compete in this space. So, like, even the deal that they're offering and the idea that, at least to me, I think Call of Duty will depreciate over another 10 years. Maybe not to a meaningful degree, but it will. Up against the idea of new stuff. Just the idea of new stuff. Even that game, Can You Reach the Finals or whatever it's called, where it's like ex-Battlefield devs doing a full-on physics-style arena shooter thing, has way more excitement and buzz around it than just another Call of Duty or whatever. And I think that there's just so much. Like I said, I can't get away from the fact that they just don't believe they can compete.
Yeah.
Of course you can. Your PlayStation, for the love of God.
What I've just remembered right now as well, Sony bought Bungie. Sony has a great in-house first-person shooter creator right now. Like, they have the teams who could work on potential competitors. They have the people who made Destiny 2 an incredible success.
And Halo.
Ironically, an incredible success that Activision didn't want and eventually sold off, but we will get back to that.
But still, even if they turn down, that's the whole thing. Right now, 10 years is on the table. Apparently that was up or something after the initial deal was knocked back.
Yeah.
And the current deal being offered to them is 10 years of Call of Duty on PlayStation before whatever happens goes forward. That's a 10-year dev window to come up with something. I just think that's more than enough time to create one of the best first-person shooters on the market when you have so much market data, so much market dominance, and so much of the competition to play off, from Titanfall to Call of Duty to Battlefield, whatever.
Yeah.
Why can't they do that, Josh?
I don't know, man. Like, look, my sort of conclusion on this is that it would be piss hard to compete with Call of Duty.
Yes.
But the point that I would make is Sony has never kind of tried to do this before, and when Call of Duty is no longer theirs, it's suddenly a case of, well, now I want to compete in that space. Now we can't compete in that space and you're taking it away from us. I would argue to an extent that Sony has already tried to do what they're blaming Microsoft for here by striking up certain exclusivity deals with Call of Duty, getting, the advertising exclusivity to always have the PlayStation brand next to the Call of Duty license, even though it's not exclusive, signing deals to get exclusive modes and whatnot. They've been trying to do with Call of Duty to get a certain amount of market dominance in the shooter space that they're kind of accusing Microsoft of just kind of flat out doing here, which is where I get a little bit caught in the weeds. The point, I think, overall, Scott, is that these legal issues are going to go on forever, and they're going to get probably even pettier, and they're going to get lawyers tangled up in the weeds and authorities tangled up in the weeds for months to come as both parties try to either push through the deal or push back against the deal.
There's also the whole reality of that per different countries, per different markets. Certain regulators have already said they're completely happy with it. It sort of depends whether you're going down a Western route or more of an Eastern route, where Call of Duty is just not as big of a thing. I think I saw China push back against it entirely.
Yeah.
But there's been a couple of other regulators that have just said, we don't mind whatever, Call of Duty is not a thing to us, which is a whole other part of this ongoing deal. But yeah, it feels like Sony are just saying whatever they need to at this stage to say that we can't possibly let Call of Duty go because we're going to lose the entire age bracket of 18 plus players and people will be forced to buy consoles. It's very scaremongery. It's very the sky's falling, everything's on fire. And I just sort of take a step back and go, do you remember who you were?
Yeah.
Do you know who you are? Because you can do way better than this. And I believe in that 10-year window they can do something, whereas they don't seem to be able to believe they can do anything.
It's a strange one, man, because like on the surface, I'm on Sony's side in the sense that I don't want a monopoly in the gaming space to, as they said, dry up innovation, ramp up the prices and stuff. I just think it's a little bit hypocritical that message is coming from Sony, who has the market dominance and has been guilty of doing some of the same anti-consumer practices that Microsoft, that they worry Microsoft will implement here.
Yeah, it's very much tasting their own medicine, and they clearly don't like it very much. But let us know what you think down in the comments below. Do you want the Activision Blizzard deal to go through? What do you think of the comments that have been made? And give us your best and worst reasons for Call of Duty to stay multi-platform or to become exclusive. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.